Introduction. The modern morning ritual no longer begins with a stretch or a cup of coffee. It begins with the glow of a screen. A staggering majority of smartphone owners reach for their devices within 15 minutes of waking. More striking still is the admission by a full third of Americans who would sooner sacrifice physical intimacy than part with their mobile phones. Academic research indicates that the average person checks their phone dozens of times daily, but those intimately familiar with the industry suggest the reality is far more extreme, with daily sessions numbering in the hundreds. The undeniable truth is that we have developed profound dependencies. The devices and platforms we interact with daily have evolved beyond mere tools, crossing the threshold into compulsions and, for some, outright addictions. It manifests in that sudden, almost involuntary impulse to glance at a notification. It is the invisible force that draws us into a social media feed for just a moment, only to release us an hour later, still scrolling, still tapping. This drive exists as a subtle undercurrent throughout our waking hours, an urge so deeply integrated into our routines that it barely registers in our conscious mind. Psychologists characterize these automatic behaviors as habits, actions initiated by environmental cues and executed with minimal cognitive deliberation. The products we return to habitually have effectively rewired our daily existence, achieving precisely what their creators intended. Our behaviors have been meticulously engineered. But how do these enterprises, which produce intangible lines of code, manage to exert such a powerful hold over human psychology? What is the secret architecture that renders a product habit-forming? In the current landscape, designing a product that cultivates a habit is not merely a competitive advantage, it is a fundamental requirement for survival. With an endless barrage of digital distractions vying for finite human attention, businesses are forced to deploy innovative strategies to remain firmly lodged in the consciousness of their users. Simply accumulating a massive user base is no longer the hallmark of victory. Instead, the true economic viability of a company is directly tied to the robustness of the habits it engenders. To secure lasting loyalty and guarantee continuous engagement, companies must decipher not just what drives a user to click a button, but the deeper psychological mechanisms that govern human behavior. While some organizations are only just beginning to grasp this paradigm shift, others have already built empires upon it, embedding their offerings so deeply into our lives that they feel indispensable. The companies that successfully forge these powerful user habits reap immense rewards by anchoring their products to internal emotional triggers. Consequently, the user is prompted to engage not by a billboard or an email, but by their own psychological state. Rather than pouring vast fortunes into aggressive marketing campaigns, these organizations weave their services into the very fabric of our daily routines and emotional fluctuations. When a fleeting sense of boredom arises, a social network is instantly opened. A sudden wave of isolation strikes, and before logic can intervene, the individual is navigating their digital feed. A question surfaces, and the mind immediately defaults to a search engine. The solution that arrives first to the mind inevitably dominates the market. My own fascination with this phenomenon began several years ago while working with a team of brilliant minds in Silicon Valley. Our objective was to establish an advertising platform within the explosive sector of online social gaming. I observed companies generating astronomical revenues by selling digital livestock on virtual farms, while advertisers allocated massive budgets to sway consumer purchasing behavior. Initially, I stood on the periphery, profoundly perplexed by the mechanics of it all. I found myself at the nexus of two industries entirely reliant on psychological persuasion, and I became consumed by a singular quest to understand exactly how these products fundamentally alter our actions and forge such deep-seated compulsions. I wanted to know how these companies engineered human behavior. I pondered the ethical weight of designing experiences that bordered on addictive, and, most crucially, I wondered if the identical psychological forces used to captivate millions could be harnessed to build products that genuinely enhance and elevate people's lives. Seeking a comprehensive blueprint for habit formation, I searched the existing literature only to be met with a void. The enterprises that had mastered the art of behavioral design closely guarded their methodologies, while academic research and scattered publications touched upon the periphery of the subject. There existed no practical, unified manual for innovators. Thus, I initiated my own rigorous documentation process, analyzing hundreds of companies to decode the recurring patterns in their interface design and user experience. I looked beyond the unique characteristics of individual businesses to isolate the core mechanisms that separated the profound successes from the forgotten failures. I integrated these observations with insights gleaned from academia, delving into consumer psychology, behavioral economics, and human-computer interaction. Over the years, I shared my emerging theories, consulting for a wide spectrum of organizations ranging from agile startups to massive global enterprises. Each engagement became a laboratory to test, refine, and validate my hypotheses. As I published my findings, a community of readers contributed their own experiences, further enriching the research. This journey culminated in years of distilled investigation into a cohesive framework, a four-stage process that elucidates how companies successfully manufacture habits. This framework is built upon the premise that through sequential cycles, a product can achieve the ultimate objective of unprompted engagement. It brings the individual back continuously without the crutch of expensive advertising. While the origins of this model stem from the technology sector, the principles are universal. These invisible mechanisms permeate our apps, our entertainment, our sports, and our professions. They exist in any experience that successfully embeds itself within our cognition. We have entered an era where habit-forming technology is omnipresent, continuously shaping the contours of our existence. The proliferation of connected devices grants creators an unprecedented capacity to influence behavior. When this constant access is coupled with the ability to swiftly mine and analyze vast troves of personal data, we face a future where nearly every interaction has the potential to become habit-forming. As prominent voices in the investment community have warned, unless the trajectory of this specific technological progress is bound by different laws than the rest of human innovation, the coming decades will yield a world far more addictive than anything we have previously known. This convergence of access, data, and speed bestows a capability so potent it borders on a superpower, and like any immense power, if wielded without ethical consideration, it can degrade into the cultivation of mindless, destructive addictions. It evokes the unsettling imagery of a society moving in a zombie-like trance, controlled by mysterious external forces. The modern resurgence of dystopian fiction and apocalyptic media perhaps reflects a collective subconscious anxiety regarding our growing subjugation to the devices we carry. Yet, despite this palpable apprehension, we possess the agency to dictate our relationship with technology. Habit-forming products, when aligned with ethical intent, harbor the potential for extraordinary good. The principles of behavioral design and choice architecture can be utilized to gently guide individuals toward decisions they already aspire to make. The objective is to construct solutions that empower people to engage in healthful behaviors, foster deeper relationships, and achieve greater productivity, actions they desire to take but often abandon due to a lack of effective tools. This methodology is not about coercion. It is about providing the mechanism through which people can bridge the gap between their intentions and their actions. The following exploration is engineered for the innovators and creators who are committed to leveraging the power of habits to improve the human condition. By connecting a user's persistent problem with a thoughtfully designed solution frequently enough, a habit is forged. The ultimate aim is to cultivate a profound understanding of how specific products alter our daily routines and, by extension, shape the very essence of who we are. This journey is structured to facilitate deep reflection and practical application. Readers will find that pausing to review the core concepts, internalizing the fundamental truths of behavior, and applying them to their own endeavors will solidify their grasp of the mechanics of engagement. As we proceed, we will uncover how businesses gain an insurmountable competitive edge by designing experiences that seamlessly transition users through the critical phases of interaction, ultimately transforming fleeting engagement into lasting, unprompted devotion. Chapter 1. The Habit Zone. There is a certain tranquility found in the rhythmic pounding of feet on pavement. For many, a morning run is a sanctuary, a time when the physical exertion somehow liberates the mind, allowing it to detach and wander. Imagine a familiar routine, lacing up shoes in the early hours, stepping out into the crisp air, and exchanging polite morning greetings with neighbors. It is a sequence performed so often it requires no deliberate thought. But what happens when that routine is slightly disrupted? Suppose an unavoidable morning obligation forces this run to be delayed until dusk. The physical environment is different, the lighting is altered, yet the mind, firmly entrenched in its morning script, might unconsciously prompt a good morning greeting to a passing neighbor despite the setting sun. This comical mismatch of context and action is a testament to the sheer power of ingrained behaviors. The mind, running on autopilot, executes its pre-programmed instructions regardless of the environmental contradictions. This phenomenon extends far beyond the track. Consider the mundane ritual of a post-run shower. The mind often drifts, the hands taking over the familiar tasks of washing and rinsing. It is entirely possible to go through the motions of lathering up and shaving a face that was already cleanly shaven that very morning, the realization dawning only after the razor has made its first pass. The evening run triggered a cascade of habitual responses, leading the body to perform morning activities without any conscious oversight. Such is the profound influence of habits. They are actions executed with minimal cognitive effort, quietly dictating nearly half of our daily lives. Neuroscience offers a fascinating explanation for this. Habits are essentially the brain's mechanism for extreme efficiency. By codifying complex sequences of actions and storing them in the basal ganglia, a region associated with involuntary behavior, the brain frees up precious conscious attention for more novel or demanding tasks. When the brain encounters a familiar situation, it bypasses active deliberation and relies on these stored shortcuts. The behavior simply occurs because it has successfully provided a resolution in the past. If a particular action solved a problem or offered relief yesterday, the brain logically assumes it remains the best course of action today. This is how nail biting transforms from an intentional attempt to remove a hangnail into an automatic response to the subtle, unconscious trigger of stress. The temporary relief becomes inextricably linked to the action, making the conditioned response incredibly difficult to break. If these internal scripts are so potent in governing our personal lives, their application within the commercial realm represents an unprecedented opportunity. For businesses capable of ethically and effectively cultivating them, consumer habits are a formidable driver of economic success. The ultimate objective of designing a habit-forming product is to achieve unprompted engagement. It is the art of influencing a user to return to a product repeatedly, entirely of their own volition, without the need for intrusive advertisements or aggressive promotional campaigns. Once a habit takes root, the user's own internal environment, a moment of boredom, a flash of uncertainty, becomes the trigger. However, it is crucial to recognize that this behavioral architecture is not universally applicable. Companies offering products purchased or utilized infrequently, such as life insurance, must rely on traditional sales and marketing channels. The principles of habit design are strictly reserved for enterprises whose very survival depends on continuous, self-initiated user interaction. For these organizations, fostering user habits yields profound competitive advantages. The first of these advantages is the significant expansion of customer lifetime value. In the realm of finance, a company's worth is inextricably tied to its capacity to generate future profits. Executives are endlessly tasked with devising strategies to bolster revenues and trim expenses to satisfy this fundamental metric. Cultivating user habits is perhaps the most robust method for achieving this, as it directly increases the duration and frequency of a customer's engagement with a product. Credit card companies, for instance, understand this intimately. They are willing to incur massive upfront costs, showering potential customers with lucrative sign-up bonuses and travel miles, because they know that once a consumer habituates to using their card, the resulting lifetime value will far exceed the initial acquisition expense. The loyalty forged through habitual use is incredibly lucrative. Furthermore, entrenched habits bestow a remarkable degree of pricing flexibility. As the legendary investor Warren Buffett observed, the true strength of a business is measured by the ease with which it can raise prices without losing its customer base. When consumers develop routines around a product, they grow dependent upon it, and their sensitivity to price fluctuations diminishes. This psychological principle underpins the massive success of the free-to-play gaming industry. Developers astutely offer their games for free, allowing players to build a compulsion and a deep desire to progress. Only after the habit is firmly established do they introduce monetization, offering virtual goods or extra lives for a fee. The transition from a non-paying user to a paying customer becomes vastly more likely once the behavior is ingrained. This same dynamic is evident in productivity software, where user engagement often dips initially, only to soar as the tool becomes integrated into daily workflows. As reliance on the software deepens, a significantly higher percentage of users willingly upgrade to premium paid tiers. Beyond revenue and pricing, habits supercharge organic growth. A user who habitually extracts value from a product becomes a natural evangelist. Frequent interaction provides numerous touchpoints for sharing content, inviting colleagues, and generating word-of-mouth awareness. This frequent usage dramatically accelerates the viral cycle time, the duration it takes for one user to bring in another. When a product is used daily, the sheer volume of interactions and invitations compounds, creating a self-perpetuating engine of expansion. This rapid cycle time is often the invisible force that propels a latecomer to market dominance, allowing them to eclipse established competitors simply by turning their user base into a highly active, hyper-engaged distribution network. This entrenched loyalty also serves to sharpen a company's competitive edge, creating a formidable barrier against rivals. It is a common entrepreneurial fallacy to believe that a marginally superior product will automatically win over the market. The reality is far more daunting. Consumers irrationally overvalue their existing routines, while innovators irrationally overvalue their new creations. To successfully dislodge an established habit, a new entrant must not merely be better, it must represent an overwhelming, undeniable leap in value. Consider the persistence of the QWERTY keyboard. Despite the existence of demonstrably more efficient layouts, the immense cognitive cost required for millions of people to relearn the physical act of typing ensures the survival of the older, inferior design. Furthermore, as users interact with habit-forming platforms, they deposit personal value, photographs, professional networks, archived communications, which non-transferably binds them to the service. The prospect of abandoning this accumulated digital wealth makes switching to a competitor highly improbable. Yet, establishing this kind of mind monopoly is notoriously difficult. Our brains possess a stubborn tendency to revert to old ways of thinking, a phenomenon where the most recently acquired habits are often the first to be abandoned under stress. For a new behavior to solidify, it must be practiced with high frequency. Much like the struggle to form a daily flossing routine, the strength of the habit is directly proportional to how often it is performed. Search engines exemplify this perfectly. The technological difference between leading search providers may be indistinguishable to the average person, but the sheer frequency of searching cements the dominant platform as the default cognitive response. The user no longer consciously decides which engine to use. The action is automatic. This frequent engagement also generates vast amounts of behavioral data, allowing the platform to continuously refine and personalize the experience, further deepening the user's reliance. However, frequency is not the sole pathway to the habit zone. An infrequent action can still forge a powerful habit if the perceived utility, the degree of pleasure gained or pain avoided, is exceptionally high. Consider the strategy of a massive online retailer that allows consumers to compare its prices with those of direct competitors on its own platform. While this might appear counterintuitive, it provides tremendous perceived utility by directly addressing the shopper's anxiety about finding the best deal. Even if the retailer loses a specific sale to a competitor, it successfully positions itself as the ultimate trustworthy destination for product discovery. Over time, the immense value derived from this transparency solidifies the retailer as the default starting point for any purchasing decision. Thus, a behavior's potential to become a habit rests on two critical axes: frequency and perceived utility. A product must cross a specific threshold on this matrix to enter the habit zone. An action that happens constantly, like web searching, requires less perceived utility to become automatic. Conversely, a less frequent behavior, like buying a television, requires immense perceived utility to cement itself as a habit. If an action falls short on both fronts, it remains a conscious, deliberate choice and fails to achieve the automaticity of a habit. This brings us to a fundamental debate among innovators. Are you building a vitamin or a painkiller? Investors and gatekeepers typically demand painkillers. products that address a highly acute, quantifiable problem. Vitamins, by contrast, appeal to emotional desires rather than urgent functional needs. We take them seeking a psychological sense of well-being, but forgetting them causes no immediate distress. Many of the most pervasive social technologies initially appear to be mere vitamins, offering nice-to-have diversions rather than solving critical problems. However, this distinction blurs over time. A habit is forged when failing to perform a specific action causes a subtle psychological discomfort, a mental itch. Habit-forming products act as the immediate salve for this itch. Therefore, these technologies often enter our lives as vitamins, but once the habit is established, they transform into vital painkillers, providing ongoing relief for the subtle anxieties they have trained us to recognize. Understanding this transformation requires a deep dive into the underlying architecture of behavioral design. We must systematically examine the mechanisms that connect a user's persistent internal state with a thoughtfully crafted solution. This journey requires dissecting the initial sparks that prompt an action, the crucial elements that make that action effortless, the psychological rewards that leave the user craving more, and the subtle investments that ensure their eventual return. The framework that governs this continuous cycle of engagement is the blueprint for creating products that fundamentally alter our daily routines. For those committed to designing such experiences, it is imperative to pause and reflect on the core dynamics at play. One must define precisely what recurring problem the product is addressing and recognize the existing, perhaps inefficient ways users currently seek relief. It is vital to estimate the expected frequency of interaction and clearly articulate the specific behavior that must become an automatic response. By answering these foundational questions, the path toward engineering genuine, lasting engagement begins to take shape. Chapter 2. Trigger. Every enduring change in human behavior requires a catalyst. The architecture of compulsion relies heavily on understanding that habits are not created, they are built upon. A behavior does not spontaneously manifest out of the void. It requires an actuator, a psychological or physical spark that initiates the sequence. This spark is the trigger. In the complex machinery of human interaction with technology, the trigger serves as the engine's ignition. It is the initial signal that cuts through the noise of daily life and commands the user's attention, directing them toward a specific action. Without this vital prompt, the carefully designed mechanisms of engagement lie dormant. Understanding the nature of these cues is the first and most critical step in engineering any lasting routine. These prompts initially manifest as external triggers. These are tangible cues embedded within the user's environment, containing explicit information about the next action to take. Unlike a vague sense of unease, an external trigger is unambiguous. It communicates its intent clearly, often utilizing text or imagery to eliminate any cognitive friction. Consider the bold red notification badge on an application icon or the prominently displayed web link in an email. These environmental signals instruct the user exactly where to click, tap, or navigate. The design of these external prompts is fundamentally about reducing the mental effort required to figure out what to do next. When the information detailing the subsequent step is embedded directly within the trigger itself, the barrier to entry plummets, making the desired behavior significantly more likely to occur. In the arsenal of the modern product designer, there are several distinct types of external triggers. The most ubiquitous, yet perhaps the least sustainable, are paid triggers. These encompass the vast landscape of digital advertising, search engine marketing, and sponsored content. Companies inject massive amounts of capital into acquiring user attention, buying space in the visual field of their target demographic. While highly effective at cutting through the noise and capturing initial interest, relying on monetary exchange to prompt ongoing engagement is a fundamentally flawed strategy for habit formation. It is prohibitively expensive to continuously rent an audience's attention. Therefore, organizations utilize these financial levers primarily as a mechanism for user acquisition, hoping to shepherd these individuals into a more sustainable cycle of engagement before the advertising budget is exhausted. Transitioning away from direct financial expenditure, companies often pursue earned triggers. These prompts require an investment of time, creativity, and strategic effort rather than raw capital. They materialize as favorable press coverage, viral videos, prominently featured placements in application storefronts, or organic trending topics. While these occurrences can generate massive spikes in user acquisition and engagement without the direct cost of advertising, they are notoriously difficult to sustain. The public's attention is inherently fickle, and the media cycle is relentlessly fast-paced. A product riding the wave of an earned trigger will inevitably see that wave crash, necessitating the continuous and exhausting generation of new captivating narratives to remain in the spotlight. A far more resilient mechanism for engagement relies on relationship triggers. Human beings are deeply social creatures, wired to respond to the recommendations and actions of their peers. A digital invitation from a colleague, a shared post from a family member, or a visible endorsement from a close friend carries a weight that no corporate advertisement can replicate. This electronic word of mouth utilizes the established trust and social capital between individuals to prompt action. The viral expansion of massive social networks and payment platforms often hinges entirely on this dynamic, where users become the active distributors of the external trigger. However, creators must navigate this territory with ethical caution. Exploiting social connections forcefully or deceptively rapidly devolves into spam, alienating users and destroying the very relationships the product seeks to leverage. The ultimate objective of any external prompting strategy is the cultivation of owned triggers. These are the cues that occupy a permanent, permitted space within the user's environment. The crucial distinction here is consent. The user has actively opted in, granting the product ongoing access to their attention. This takes the form of an app icon resting on the primary home screen, a subscribed email newsletter arriving in an inbox, or authorized push notifications illuminating a lock screen. Because the individual has explicitly allowed these intrusions, the product has secured a direct, undisputed line of communication. Owned triggers are the vital bridge between a fleeting interaction and a permanent routine, repeatedly prompting the user to engage until the external cue is no longer necessary. The transition away from these environmental prompts marks the evolution into the realm of internal triggers. This is the holy grail of behavioral design. When a product becomes inextricably linked with a thought, an emotion, or a pre-existing routine, it leverages an internal trigger. These cues manifest entirely within the user's mind. The most powerful of these mental actuators are negative emotions. Feelings of boredom, loneliness, frustration, confusion, or indecision act as subtle, persistent psychological aches. When an individual experiences one of these uncomfortable emotional states, they instinctively, often unconsciously, reach for a salve to soothe the discomfort. If a product consistently provides relief from this specific mental friction, the brain forges a powerful association. The emotion itself becomes the trigger. The user no longer needs an external notification to open a social network. The mere sensation of isolation prompts the action automatically. The product is fundamentally woven into the emotional fabric of the user's daily existence. Building for triggers demands a profound and empathetic understanding of the user's internal landscape. It is insufficient to merely construct functional interfaces. Designers must investigate the psychological bedrock of their audience. They must identify the precise, often unspoken, emotional pain points their product resolves. This requires moving beyond surface-level demographics and delving into user narratives, employing investigative techniques to unearth the root emotional causes of behavior. By repeatedly asking why a user behaves in a certain manner, creators can peel back the layers of rationalization to reveal the raw, underlying internal trigger. Only by identifying this core emotional itch can a product be designed to act as the perfect, soothing scratch, ensuring the user returns time and time again when that specific emotion surfaces. Unpacking Instagram's triggers offers a masterclass in this evolutionary process. In its nascent stages, the platform heavily utilized external triggers to build its network. By seamlessly integrating with existing platforms like Twitter and Facebook, it employed relationship triggers, relying on users to broadcast their filtered photographs to their broader social circles, thereby inviting new users into the ecosystem. Concurrently, it secured owned triggers through app downloads and push notifications. However, the true genius of the product lies in its mastery of internal triggers. The platform expertly tethered its use to the fear of losing a fleeting memory, the pervasive anxiety of missing out on social events, and the omnipresent ache of boredom. Over time, the physical environment itself became the cue. The act of witnessing a beautiful sunset or an appetizing meal automatically triggered the urge to capture and share it. The behavior was no longer prompted by the application. It was prompted by the user's lived experience and emotional response to their surroundings. As we remember and share these concepts, it becomes clear that the initiation of any habitual behavior is a deliberate, orchestrated event. It requires a deep comprehension of how external environments and internal emotional states interact to drive human action. The journey begins with distinct, clear signals placed in the user's path. But the ultimate victory is achieved when those signals are entirely internalized, transforming a deliberate choice into an automatic, emotionally driven response. For those seeking to implement this framework, it is imperative to do this now. Rigorously examine the initial touchpoints of your user experience. Identify the specific external triggers being deployed and evaluate their effectiveness in clearly communicating the desired next action. More importantly, interrogate the emotional reality of your target audience. Pinpoint the precise negative emotion or psychological discomfort that your offering alleviates. Map the journey from the explicit external cue to the implicit internal need, ensuring that every design decision serves to strengthen the bond between the user's emotional state and the relief your product provides. Chapter 3. Action. A trigger, no matter how brilliantly engineered or strategically placed, is entirely useless if it fails to result in the desired behavior. If the prompt is the spark, the subsequent phase is the engine turning over. We must now examine the precise mechanics of human behavior, specifically the gap between a prompt and the execution of a task. The fundamental battleground in any user experience is the conflict between action versus inaction. Human beings are inherently wired for energy conservation. Our default state is resting. To overcome this inertia, an action must be meticulously designed to require the absolute minimum of physical and cognitive exertion. In the context of habit formation, an action is defined as the simplest behavior performed in anticipation of a reward. It is not a complex, multi-step process requiring intense concentration. It is the swift, almost thoughtless swipe, tap, or click that propels the user deeper into the system. Understanding why a person chooses to act, or conversely, chooses to ignore a trigger, requires deconstructing the architecture of human decision-making. A leading framework in behavioral psychology posits that for any behavior to occur, three elements must converge simultaneously. A trigger must be present, the user must have sufficient motivation, and the user must possess the adequate ability to complete the task. If any single component is missing or insufficient, the action will simply not happen. We must first examine motivation. If a trigger is the signal to act, motivation is the underlying desire that fuels the engine. It is the raw emotional energy that compels a human being to exert effort. While the complexities of human motivation have been debated by philosophers for centuries, in the realm of behavioral design, it can be distilled into three core primal drives. First, we are driven to seek pleasure and avoid pain. Second, we are motivated by the anticipation of hope and the avoidance of fear. Finally, as deeply social creatures, we are profoundly moved by the desire for social acceptance and the terror of social rejection. These three fundamental binaries dictate the vast majority of our spontaneous choices. When a product aligns its action with the fulfillment of one of these primal drives, the user's internal desire to engage skyrockets. The deployment of these emotional levers is most vividly demonstrated when examining motivation examples in advertising. Marketers have long understood that logical arguments rarely drive immediate action. Emotional resonance does. Consider campaigns that heavily feature imagery of sensual pleasure or joyous social gatherings. These are direct appeals to our drive for pleasure and social acceptance. Conversely, public health advertisements or insurance campaigns often utilize stark, unsettling imagery to leverage the powerful motivator of fear and the avoidance of pain. By anchoring the desired action, whether it is purchasing a beverage or buying a policy, to these deep-seated emotional drives, the creators artificially inflate the user's motivation, tipping the scales heavily in favor of action. However, even a mountain of motivation is useless if the task itself is too difficult. This brings us to the critical concept of ability. In behavioral design, ability is not a measure of a user's intelligence or physical strength. It is a measure of the product's simplicity. If a task requires too much time, demands too much money, necessitates excessive physical effort, or requires deep cognitive processing, the user's ability to perform it plummets. Furthermore, if a behavior violates social norms or disrupts established routines, it creates immense friction. The designer's absolute priority must be the relentless elimination of these barriers. Innovation in this context is entirely about removing steps from a process, stripping away any obstacle that stands between the user and their intended goal. Consider the profound impact of logging in with Facebook. For years, accessing a new digital service required navigating a tedious registration form, inventing a password, and verifying an email address. This process demanded significant cognitive effort and time, causing massive user drop-off. By introducing a centralized, single-click login mechanism, the barrier to entry was practically eradicated. The action was reduced from a multi-minute chore to a split-second, thoughtless tap. This relentless pursuit of simplicity fundamentally altered the trajectory of countless digital platforms, proving that reducing friction is often more powerful than increasing desire. A similar revolution occurred with the concept of sharing with the Twitter button. Previously, sharing an interesting article required highlighting the text, copying the link, opening a new tab, logging into a separate platform, pasting the information, and hitting send. It was a high-friction endeavor. The introduction of a ubiquitous embedded sharing button condensed that entire sequence into a singular action. By dramatically increasing the user's ability to share, the volume of content distributed across the network exploded, demonstrating that when a behavior is made effortless, it becomes ubiquitous. This principle of radical simplification is the bedrock of searching with Google. The platform's dominance is not solely due to the superiority of its algorithm. It is deeply rooted in the reduction of cognitive load. As a user begins to type, the search engine immediately anticipates the query, offering autocomplete suggestions. This feature removes the need for the user to fully articulate their thought or manually spell out complex terms. The system does the heavy lifting, allowing the user to simply recognize their intended search rather than actively recall and type it. This seemingly minor reduction in brain cycles translates into a profound competitive advantage. Hardware manufacturers are equally obsessed with eliminating friction, as seen in the evolution of taking photos with the Apple iPhone. Capturing a fleeting moment requires immediate action. Every second spent navigating a menu is a barrier. Recognizing this, designers moved the camera access directly to the lock screen. The user no longer needed to unlock the device, locate the application, and launch it. A simple upward swipe bypassed all previous steps. By making the action instantaneous, the device ensured it was the default tool for capturing spontaneous memories, securing its place as the most widely used camera in the world. In the realm of content consumption, the friction of navigation can severely hinder engagement. This challenge was elegantly solved by the mechanism of scrolling with Pinterest. In the early days of the web, reaching the end of a page required the user to actively click a button to load the next set of results. This pause forced a conscious decision. Do I want to continue? By implementing an infinite scroll, the platform removed the need for that decision entirely. New content loads automatically as the user approaches the bottom of the screen. The action required to consume more content is reduced to the simplest possible physical movement, a continuous downward swipe, resulting in mesmerizing, unbroken sessions of engagement. Faced with the dual levers of human behavior, creators inevitably ask, motivation or ability, which should you increase first? The instinct is often to focus on motivation, attempting to craft compelling narratives to convince users to perform difficult tasks. This is a costly and often futile endeavor. Human motivation is a highly volatile resource, easily depleted by distraction, fatigue, or stress. It is far more effective and vastly more economical to increase ability. Making a behavior exceptionally easy guarantees that it can be performed even when motivation is at its lowest ebb. The path of least resistance is the path to habituation. Designers must ruthlessly audit their experiences, identifying and destroying any element that demands unnecessary effort from the user. The The power of this reductive approach is perfectly illustrated by the evolution of Twitter's homepage. In its infancy, the platform's landing page was a chaotic mosaic of trending topics, search bars, and explanations of the service. It demanded intense cognitive processing just to understand what the product was. Over time, the design team systematically stripped away every extraneous element. The modern iteration became hyper-focused on a single binary choice: log in or sign up. By drastically reducing the visual noise and eliminating competing calls to action, the platform funneled user attention directly toward the desired behavior, proving that clarity and simplicity are the ultimate drivers of conversion. To truly master the mechanics of action, one must look beyond physical clicks and examine the subconscious mental shortcuts that govern human choices. This leads to a necessary discussion on heuristics and perception. The human brain is bombarded with far more information than it can consciously process. To survive this sensory overload, the mind relies on heuristics, subconscious cognitive biases and mental shortcuts that allow for rapid decision-making. These hidden mechanics profoundly influence how we perceive value and make choices. By understanding and ethically applying these principles, designers can subtly guide behavior without relying on overt coercion. One of the most potent of these cognitive biases is the scarcity effect. Human psychology is hardwired to value that which is difficult to obtain. When an item or opportunity is perceived as limited in quantity or availability, its perceived value drastically increases. The anxiety of missing out overrides logical assessment. This is why a product labeled "only 3 left in stock" suddenly becomes immensely desirable, or why an exclusive invite-only application generates massive waiting lists. The artificial constraint triggers a primal urgency to act before the opportunity vanishes, compelling users to execute behaviors they might otherwise delay. Equally powerful is the framing effect, which dictates that our perception of an object's value is entirely dependent on the context in which it is presented. The mind does not evaluate things in a vacuum. It relies on surrounding cues to form a judgment. In blind taste tests, individuals consistently rate a wine as superior when they are told it is highly expensive, even if it is identical to a cheaper alternative. The price tag frames the experience, altering the actual sensory perception. In product design, the visual presentation, the surrounding copy, and the brand aesthetic all serve to frame the core offering. If the context signals high value, the user's motivation to interact with the product naturally elevates. This reliance on context extends to the anchoring effect. When making decisions, the human brain tends to rely heavily on the first piece of information it receives, using it as an anchor against which all subsequent information is judged. If a consumer is first exposed to a high-priced item, subsequent moderately priced items will appear to be bargains. This heuristic is frequently utilized in pricing strategies and subscription tiers, where the presence of an expensive premium option makes the standard option feel immensely reasonable, gently guiding the user toward the intended purchase action. Finally, we must consider the remarkable power of the endowed progress effect. Human beings possess a deep-seated psychological need to complete tasks. However, the initial motivation to start a task is often low. This effect demonstrates that motivation surges when people believe they are already closer to completing a goal than they actually are. A classic study involving loyalty punch cards revealed that customers given a 10-hole card with 2 punches already completed were significantly more likely to finish the card than those given an entirely blank 8-hole card, despite the required effort being identical. By providing the illusion of initial progress, such as a profile completion bar that starts at 20%, designers provide a psychological head start, dramatically increasing the likelihood that the user will take the necessary actions to cross the finish line. As we pause to remember and share these insights, the crucial takeaway is that action is not the byproduct of force. It is the result of meticulously eliminated friction. The most successful products do not badger users into compliance. They create an environment where the desired behavior is the most natural, effortless response possible. By understanding the primal levers of motivation and coupling them with a ruthless dedication to simplicity, creators can design experiences that flow seamlessly from the initial trigger to the execution of the task. For those actively building these experiences, it is imperative to do this now. Conduct a ruthless audit of the exact sequence required for a user to perform your product's core action. Count the clicks, the screen transitions, and the cognitive leaps required. Identify the specific moments of friction, the form fields, the confusing copy, the unnecessary choices, and systematically eliminate them. Furthermore, analyze the emotional state of your user at the moment of action. Are you adequately addressing a core motivator? Are you unknowingly creating a barrier through complexity? The path to establishing a habit begins by making the behavior so simple that it requires more effort to ignore it than to execute it. Chapter 4. Variable Reward. Understanding. Rewards begins by venturing into the intricate neurological pathways that govern human desire. For decades, the pursuit of pleasure was considered the primary driver of human action. It was widely believed that the brain sought out experiences solely to attain a state of satisfaction or joy. However, pioneering experiments in neuroscience, particularly those involving electrical stimulation of the brain's reward center, revealed a far more complex reality. When subjects were given the ability to trigger a mild electrical impulse to the nucleus accumbens, the resulting behavior was not a state of blissful satiation, but rather a frantic, unceasing compulsion to activate the impulse again and again. The stimulation did not provide the reward itself. It stimulated the overwhelming anticipation of the reward. The neurological system, flooded with the neurotransmitter dopamine, was not experiencing pleasure, but rather an intense craving. This distinction is the bedrock of behavioral design. The human brain is captivated not necessarily by the receipt of a reward, but by the relentless anticipation of it. The psychological itch that drives behavior is the craving to resolve the unknown. Understanding variability is crucial to mastering this psychological mechanism. If a sequence of actions produces a predictable, unchanging outcome, the brain quickly adapts. The novelty wears off, the dopamine response flatlines, and the behavior transitions from a compulsion to a mundane chore. The introduction of variability fundamentally alters this dynamic. The foundational work of psychologist B.F. Skinner demonstrated this phenomenon perfectly. When animals were rewarded with food every single time they pressed a lever, they engaged with the mechanism steadily, pressing it only when hungry. However, when the reward was delivered on a variable ratio, sometimes dispensing a large amount of food, sometimes none at all, the frequency of the behavior skyrocketed. The subjects engaged with the lever incessantly, driven by the unpredictable nature of the outcome. In the human context, this unpredictability acts as a cognitive magnet. The mind is inherently designed to recognize patterns and solve problems. When it encounters a pattern that is wildly unpredictable, it hyperfocuses, pouring cognitive resources into the experience in a relentless attempt to decipher the underlying logic. It is this very unpredictability that transforms a simple action into a highly engaging, habit-forming loop. Rewards of the tribe, hunt, and self represent the three distinct categories of variable rewards that successfully captivate the human mind. The search for resolution and the alleviation of craving can be categorized into our evolutionary drives for social connection, material resources, and intrinsic mastery. A truly compelling experience often weaves one or more of these reward types into its architecture. Rewards of the tribe are deeply rooted in our evolutionary history as a profoundly social species. Our survival once depended entirely on our standing within the community, our ability to cooperate, and our perceived value to the group. The modern digital landscape has digitized these primal needs. When an individual shares a photograph, voices an opinion, or posts an achievement online, they are instinctively seeking social validation. The variability lies in the reception. Will the post be met with overwhelming approval, or will it be ignored? The accumulation of likes, shares, comments, and upvotes serves as a quantifiable measure of social capital. The uncertainty of how the tribe will react provides a powerful, intermittent dopamine rush. This drive for empathetic connection and social approval is the invisible engine powering the world's most ubiquitous social networks, keeping individuals endlessly tethered to their feeds in anticipation of the next digital nod of acceptance. Rewards of the hunt speak to an equally ancient human imperative: the relentless pursuit of resources for survival. The ancestral imperative to track game and forage for sustenance has been elegantly translated into the modern era. Today, the territory being hunted is rarely a physical wilderness. It is the vast expanse of the information ecosystem. The compulsion to continuously scroll through a social media timeline, a news aggregator, or a visual discovery platform perfectly mimics the psychology of the hunt. The user is actively foraging for a specific resource, a compelling article, a striking image, or an entertaining video. The vast majority of the content encountered is irrelevant, but the erratic, unpredictable discovery of something highly valuable provides a potent neurological reward. This variable ratio schedule of information retrieval is structurally identical to the mechanics of a slot machine, where the user repeatedly pulls the proverbial lever, endlessly searching for the next payout of engaging content. Rewards of the self are driven by a more intrinsic, deeply personal motivation, the desire for mastery, competence, and completion. This internal drive exists independently of social validation or the acquisition of external resources. It is the profound psychological satisfaction derived from conquering an obstacle, deciphering a puzzle, or simply organizing chaos into order. This is the mechanism at play when a player spends countless hours navigating complex challenges to level up in a video game, driven solely by the internal gratification of skill acquisition. It is also the hidden force behind the relentless urge to clear every unread message from an inbox or check off every item on a digital to-do list. The variability exists in the challenge itself, the uncertainty of whether the puzzle can be solved or the task completed. The reward is the psychological resolution, the quiet triumph of imposing order and achieving mastery over a given domain. Important considerations for designing reward systems must be acknowledged to prevent the misapplication of these powerful psychological levers. It is a common misconception that one can arbitrarily attach a variable reward to any given product and miraculously manufacture a habit. Rewards must fit the narrative of the user's specific problem. If the reward does not provide adequate resolution to the internal trigger that initiated the action, the cycle collapses. A product designed to alleviate the anxiety of managing personal finances will not succeed by offering tribal rewards. The user is seeking control and competence, not social validation. The reward must deeply resonate with the specific emotional itch the user is attempting to scratch. Variable rewards are not a free pass for poorly designed experiences or products lacking inherent value. The mere presence of unpredictability cannot salvage a fundamentally flawed core offering. This misunderstanding often manifests in the superficial application of gamification, slapping badges, leaderboards, and points onto mundane software in a desperate attempt to boost engagement. If the underlying behavior does not serve a genuine purpose or provide real value to the user, these artificial rewards quickly become transparent and insulting. True behavioral design seamlessly integrates the variable reward into the core utility of the product, ensuring that the unpredictable element directly enhances the resolution of the user's initial need. Maintain a sense of autonomy is a critical mandate for any system seeking long-term engagement. Human beings possess a deeply ingrained psychological reflex known as reactance. When individuals feel that their freedom of choice is being restricted or that they are being coerced into a specific behavior, they instinctively rebel. To foster a sustainable habit, the user must always feel that they are in control of their actions. The most effective behavioral interventions do not demand compliance. They respectfully present an opportunity. Research indicates that simply reminding an individual of their freedom to choose, using phrases like, "but you are free to accept or refuse," drastically increases the likelihood of compliance. A product must feel like a tool the user wields for their own benefit, not a master dictating their schedule. Beware of finite variability represents the persistent threat of stagnation. A reward system that relies on a fixed, exhaustible set of outcomes is inherently vulnerable. Consider a tightly scripted video game or a traditional jigsaw puzzle. They are highly engaging the first time through. But once the mystery is solved and the pattern is recognized, the variability plummets to zero. The habit is broken because the brain has nothing left to anticipate. To sustain long-term engagement, products must strive for infinite variability. This is often achieved by leveraging user-generated content, where the interactions, opinions, and creations of the community continuously inject fresh, unpredictable elements into the experience. The platform simply provides the framework, while the users themselves generate the endless supply of variable rewards. Remember and share the core truth that human action is fundamentally driven by the anticipation of a reward, not merely its receipt. The introduction of unpredictability magnifies this craving, capturing the mind's attention and driving repeated engagement. By carefully selecting the appropriate type of reward, whether it appeals to our need for social connection, our drive to acquire resources, or our pursuit of mastery, and ensuring it authentically resolves the user's underlying problem, creators can forge powerful, enduring routines. However, this power must be wielded with respect for the user's autonomy and an understanding of the constant need for novel, infinite variability. Do this now requires a rigorous assessment of the resolution phase within your own user experience. Examine the precise moment the user completes the intended action. Does the immediate outcome provide a sense of relief to their internal trigger? More importantly, is there an element of unpredictability in the outcome that leaves them craving more? Analyze whether your current framework relies on finite, predictable patterns, or if it possesses the capacity for infinite, self-renewing variability. The strength of the habit relies entirely on keeping the user deeply invested in discovering what happens next. Chapter 5. Investment. The culmination of the behavioral cycle does not end with the rush of the variable reward. While the prior phases are designed to deliver immediate psychological relief and heighten anticipation, the final stage is structurally different. It asks the user to give rather than to receive. This is the domain of investment. Unlike the action phase, which demands frictionless execution and instantaneous gratification, this phase requires a deliberate injection of effort. It operates on the premise that a user will perform a small task not for an immediate payout, but for a future benefit that enhances their next experience. This calculated friction is the vital mechanism that transforms a fleeting interaction into an enduring behavioral loop, firmly locking the user into the ecosystem. Changing attitude is a profound psychological phenomenon that underpins this final stage. Human beings are not entirely rational calculators. Our perception of value is heavily distorted by our own actions. The more effort we expend on a particular object or endeavor, the more we inherently value it. Behavioral economists refer to this as the escalation of commitment. We observe this when individuals construct heavily assembled furniture. The sheer physical frustration and time invested artificially inflate their affection for the final, often flawed product. Furthermore, humans possess a deep-seated need for cognitive consistency. To avoid the mental discomfort of cognitive dissonance, we continuously alter our beliefs to align with our past behaviors. If an individual has invested time and energy into a digital service, their brain rationalizes that the service must be highly valuable to justify the expenditure. By prompting these small commitments, a product fundamentally rewrites the user's internal valuation system, aligning their attitude with ongoing usage. Bits of work are the currency of this phase. We are not asking the user to perform monumental, exhausting tasks. Instead, we are asking for micro-investments that subtly alter the trajectory of their relationship with the product. These are the small, seemingly innocuous actions: selecting a preference, swiping right on a profile, organizing a folder, or granting access to a contact list. While these actions may introduce momentary friction, it is a strategic, meaningful friction. It is effort deployed specifically to increase the likelihood of the user returning. By completing these minor tasks, the user transitions from a passive consumer into an active collaborator in the product's development, laying the groundwork for a deeply personalized experience upon their next visit. Storing value is the unique characteristic that separates habit-forming technologies from physical commodities. In the physical realm, objects depreciate. A brand new vehicle loses a significant portion of its worth the moment it is driven off the lot. A garment slowly degrades with every wash. Digital platforms, however, possess the extraordinary ability to appreciate. The more an individual interacts with them, the richer and more indispensable they become. The user's bits of work are continuously banked, compounding over time. This stored value acts as a powerful deterrent against abandonment, as leaving the service would mean forfeiting the immense digital wealth they have painstakingly accumulated. This wealth manifests in several distinct forms. Content represents the most visible form of stored value. Every time a user uploads a photograph, archives an important document, adds a song to a personalized playlist, or saves a compelling article for future reading, they are depositing raw material into the platform's vault. Over time, this collection transforms into a highly curated, irreplaceable digital museum of their life, tastes, and memories. The thought of migrating thousands of curated songs or a decade's worth of family photographs to a competing, empty platform presents a colossal barrier. The sheer mass of the accumulated content binds the user to the original service. Data acts as the invisible tether connecting the user to the algorithm. When consumers input personal information, track their daily caloric intake, log their geographic movements, or link their financial accounts, they are providing the system with the raw intelligence needed to refine its operation. The platform metabolizes this data to offer highly personalized recommendations, precise analytics, and tailored experiences that a new competitor simply cannot match. The investment of data ensures that the product continuously molds itself to the specific contours of the individual's life, making the friction of starting over elsewhere incredibly unappealing. Followers constitute a social asset of immense power. In the architecture of networking platforms, the audience a user cultivates is a form of stored value that requires immense time, wit, and dedication to build. Whether it is an influential voice on a microblogging site or a creative artist on a visual portfolio platform, their reach and social influence are directly tied to the specific network where they have gathered their audience. Because these follower graphs are notoriously difficult, if not impossible, to export, the user is permanently anchored to the platform that houses their community. To leave is to willingly mute one's own voice and sever established social ties. Reputation is perhaps the most fragile and fiercely protected form of stored value. On marketplaces and gig economy platforms, a user's accumulated ratings and reviews dictate their ability to transact, command premium pricing, and secure trust from strangers. A flawless host rating or a perfect seller score is an economic asset meticulously built over hundreds of interactions. It stands as a testament to their reliability. Because this reputation is isolated within the walls of a specific platform, it prevents the user from seeking slightly better financial terms on a rival service. Moving to a new platform means starting over as an unproven, untrusted entity. Skill represents an internal, cognitive investment that is equally difficult to abandon. When a user dedicates hours to mastering a complex interface, learning arcane keyboard shortcuts, or understanding the nuanced workflow of a professional software suite, they have stored immense value within their own neurological pathways. This mastery makes them highly efficient and capable within that specific environment. To switch to a competing software requires not just a transfer of files, but a painful regression back to the frustrating state of a novice. The reluctance to endure that steep learning curve again acts as a powerful mechanism for retention.
Loading the next trigger is the strategic pivot that completes the cycle and primes the engine for the next revolution. The most elegantly designed investments serve a dual purpose. They store value, but they also plant the seed for future engagement. When a user sends a message through a communication application, they are investing time and effort into the platform. However, that very action simultaneously loads the mechanism for the next external trigger, the inevitable notification informing them of a reply. When an individual pins an item to a digital board, they are often granting the system permission to notify them when similar items are discovered or when the price drops. The investment must not be a dead end. It must seamlessly set the stage for the next prompt, ensuring the loop remains active and self-perpetuating. Remember and share the fundamental truth that lasting engagement cannot be bought solely through pleasure or ease. It must be earned through the strategic application of effort. By asking the user to contribute small bits of work, a product initiates the powerful psychological forces of commitment and consistency. More importantly, it allows the platform to capture stored value, whether through content, data, followers, reputation, or skill, that makes the experience increasingly indispensable. The true mastery of behavioral design lies in ensuring that every investment seamlessly loads the trigger for the next interaction, creating a continuous, unbroken chain of engagement. do this now requires a deep structural review of what occurs immediately after your user experiences their variable reward. Are you asking them to do a bit of work to improve their next visit, or are you simply letting them walk away? Identify what form of stored value is most appropriate for your specific offering and evaluate the mechanisms by which you are capturing it. Most critically, audit the end of your user journey to ensure that their final action actively loads the next trigger. If the cycle is broken, the habit cannot form. The investment must always point the way back to the beginning.
Chapter 6. What are you going to do with this? We have successfully dismantled the architecture of human compulsion. We have examined the precise mechanisms that initiate behavior, the levers that remove friction, the unpredictable rewards that fuel craving, and the investments that bind a user to a system. Armed with this profound understanding of psychological engineering, a critical question immediately surfaces, one that transcends design and enters the realm of philosophy. The frameworks we have explored are not mere abstract theories. They are highly effective tools for altering human behavior. To possess the knowledge of how to forge a habit is to possess a formidable, almost daunting degree of power. The ultimate test for any creator, therefore, is not whether they can build a deeply engaging product, but whether they should. The morality of manipulation is the shadow that inevitably stalks the study of behavioral design. The word manipulation carries a distinctly sinister resonance, conjuring images of exploitation and deceit. Yet, at its core, any technology designed to change how people act is inherently manipulative. The discomfort arises because we cherish the illusion of complete free will. We prefer to believe that our choices are entirely our own, uninfluenced by external architectures. However, acknowledging the reality of our susceptibility is the first step toward ethical design. The distinction between a helpful tool and an insidious trap lies entirely in the intent of the architect and the outcome for the individual. If we utilize the mechanics of habit formation to help people achieve their own stated goals, to exercise more frequently, to eat healthier, to connect more deeply with loved ones, we are engaging in a benign, even noble, form of influence. We are bridging the gap between an individual's aspirations and their actual behavior. However, if these same mechanics are deployed to extract time, attention, and resources to the detriment of the user's well-being, we cross a dark ethical line. The manipulation matrix provides a crucial compass for navigating this perilous moral landscape. It forces creators to ruthlessly examine their own motivations before they write a single line of code or sketch a wireframe. This framework demands honest answers to two brutally simple questions. First, does this product materially improve the user's life? Second, am I, the creator, going to use this product myself? The intersection of the answers to these two inquiries creates four distinct archetypes of creators, each occupying a vastly different ethical and strategic position. The facilitator represents the most ethically sound and strategically advantageous archetype. This individual answers affirmatively to both foundational questions. They believe their creation fundamentally improves lives, and they actively use the product to solve their own internal triggers. The facilitator is not guessing at the emotional landscape of their audience. They are experiencing it firsthand. This profound empathy is an invaluable asset in product development. When you are building a solution for your own distinct pain, the subtle nuances of frustration and the precise nature of the desired reward are immediately apparent. The history of technological innovation is overwhelmingly populated by facilitators, visionaries who built systems they desperately needed for themselves, only to discover that millions of others shared the same affliction. By embodying the user, the facilitator ensures that the habit being forged is one of genuine empowerment rather than extraction. The peddler operates from a more detached position. This creator genuinely believes their product improves the lives of their users, but they do not use it themselves. They answer yes to the first question, but no to the second. Consider a young, athletic software engineer designing a habit-forming application intended to help the elderly manage their medication schedules. The intent is undeniably altruistic, but a critical vulnerability exists. The peddler lacks the visceral, lived experience of the problem. Because they do not feel the specific internal trigger, they must rely on observation, focus groups, and secondary research to understand the emotional reality of their audience. While not ethically compromised, the peddler often struggles to achieve profound success because they risk creating solutions that are logically sound but emotionally hollow. They are attempting to scratch an itch they cannot personally feel. The entertainer resides in a vastly different quadrant. This creator actively uses their own product, but they harbor no illusions that it fundamentally improves anyone's life in a meaningful, lasting way. They are the architects of the vitamin, the games, the fleeting social distractions, the digital diversions that provide a temporary escape from boredom or stress. Entertainment is a fundamental human need, and there is no inherent malice in providing it. However, the entertainer faces a grueling strategic reality. The human appetite for novelty is insatiable, and the half-life of an entertainment habit is notoriously short. What captivates the masses today becomes deeply mundane tomorrow. To survive, the entertainer must constantly run on a treadmill of innovation, perpetually generating new variable rewards to prevent the audience from abandoning the platform for the next shiny distraction. It is a highly volatile, hit-driven existence. The dealer occupies the darkest corner of the matrix. This creator builds products that they know do not improve the user's life, and they strictly avoid using the product themselves. They understand the mechanics of compulsion perfectly, but they deploy them purely for exploitation and profit. This is the domain of predatory gambling mechanics, exploitative digital ecosystems, and any enterprise that knowingly profits from the destructive addictions of its user base. The dealer views the user not as a human being with aspirations, but as an algorithm to be hacked, a resource to be depleted. From an ethical standpoint, this position is indefensible. The behavioral designer who chooses this path wields their knowledge as a weapon rather than a tool, inflicting psychological damage for the sake of financial gain. Remember and share the immense responsibility that accompanies the mastery of human behavior. The ability to engineer habits is a profound power, and like any power, its moral weight is determined entirely by the hands that wield it. The line between a product that empowers and one that exploits is razor thin, defined by the creator's empathy, their honest assessment of the product's value, and their willingness to consume their own creation. To build without a moral compass is to risk architecting a society deeply enslaved to mindless compulsions. Do this now requires a moment of intense, unsparing self-reflection. Look at the product, the service, or the experience you are currently building or planning to build. Place yourself honestly within the matrix. Are you truly a facilitator, deeply connected to the problem and the solution, or have you drifted into the territory of the peddler, or worse, the dealer? If you find yourself building a system that you would not wish upon your own family, or utilizing psychological levers to extract value rather than provide it, you must urgently re-evaluate your mission. The future of technology demands architects who design not just for engagement, but for elevation. Chapter 7. Case Study. The Bible App. To truly grasp the universal applicability of behavioral design, we must venture beyond the familiar territory of social networks, mobile games, and e-commerce platforms. We must examine an artifact that predates the digital era by millennia, yet has been flawlessly adapted to command the attention of the modern mind. In the beginning, the endeavor to digitize ancient scripture seemed straightforward. A deeply devoted innovator named Bobby Grunewald sought to leverage modern technology to increase engagement with the Bible. His initial attempt was a traditional website, heavily reliant on desktop access and complex reading plans. It was a logical approach, but it fundamentally failed to alter user behavior. The friction was simply too high. To interact with the text, a user had to be stationary, actively boot up a computer, and dedicate a specific block of time. It demanded a massive surge of motivation to overcome the inherent inconvenience. Grunewald realized that for the ancient words to truly permeate a modern life, they could not be confined to a desk. They had to travel seamlessly with the individual. The text needed to intercept the user within the natural rhythm of their day. The advent of the smartphone provided the perfect omnipresent vessel. By stripping away the heavy interface of the website and condensing the experience into a streamlined mobile application, a habit is born. The initial launch on the mobile app store resulted in explosive, unprecedented growth. This surge was not the byproduct of a colossal marketing budget or aggressive advertising campaigns. It was the direct result of obliterating the barrier to entry. For centuries, engaging with the scripture required carrying a physical, often cumbersome book. It was an activity reserved for designated times and places. The mobile application fundamentally altered this dynamic. It transformed a heavy physical object into a weightless, immediate digital utility. The friction of access dropped to absolute zero, allowing users to consume brief fragments of text in the fleeting, marginal moments of their day, waiting in a line, riding a bus, or pausing between meetings. The underlying architecture of this staggering sustained engagement is a flawless execution of the behavioral cycle, a mechanism we can accurately describe as the heavenly hook. The application expertly deploys external triggers to initiate the sequence. The most prominent of these is the daily notification delivering a carefully curated verse of the day. This owned trigger is permitted by the user and arrives predictably, cutting through the digital noise to offer a moment of reflection. However, the true mastery of the platform lies in its deep connection to internal triggers. Life is inherently fraught with emotional turbulence. When a user experiences a sudden wave of anxiety, a profound sense of loss, or a desperate need for guidance, these negative emotional states act as powerful internal prompts. The application has successfully positioned itself as the immediate, accessible salve for these spiritual and emotional aches. The individual no longer needs a physical reminder. The emotional distress itself automatically triggers the urge to seek comfort within the digital pages. Once the trigger fires, the required action is astonishingly simple. The interface is meticulously stripped of distraction. Opening the application and reading a single short verse requires virtually no cognitive exertion. Recognizing that reading text on a small screen still presented a barrier for some, the developers further reduced friction by integrating high-quality audio versions. This profound increase in ability meant the user could consume the text while driving, exercising, or performing household chores. The action of engagement was made so effortless that it could be performed regardless of the user's physical circumstance or fluctuating levels of motivation. Following the action, the user encounters a potent, variable reward. Scripture is vast, complex, and deeply metaphorical. When a user turns to the application in a moment of distress, they are seeking the reward of the self, the internal resolution of finding wisdom or peace. The variability stems from the unpredictable intersection of the ancient text with the user's highly specific, immediate life circumstance. A verse read 100 times before might suddenly yield a startlingly new interpretation that perfectly addresses the user's current crisis. The user never knows exactly which passage will resonate, creating a continuous, compelling urge to search the text. Furthermore, the application introduces rewards of the tribe through social features. Users can see which passages their friends are highlighting and read their reflections, fostering a deep sense of community and shared spiritual journey, fulfilling the deeply human need for connection and validation. The cycle is cemented through deliberate user investment. The application encourages users to highlight passages, create personalized bookmarks, and append private notes to specific verses. These bits of work systematically capture the user's intellectual and emotional engagement, storing immense personal value within the platform. The application transforms from a generic text into a highly customized, irreplaceable spiritual diary. Most critically, the platform offers structured reading plans. When a user commits to a 30-day reading sequence, they are not only investing their intent, but they are also explicitly loading the next trigger. The system is granted permission to remind them tomorrow to maintain their streak. The friction of the initial commitment guarantees the initiation of the next cycle. With a resounding amen, the unprecedented success of this application serves as the ultimate validation of the behavioral design framework. Boasting hundreds of millions of downloads and billions of minutes of active engagement, it achieved absolute market dominance without relying on predatory monetization or the exploitation of base human instincts. The creators operated as pure facilitators, utilizing their deep empathy to build a tool that empowered users to achieve their own deeply held, life-enriching aspirations. They proved that the mechanics of compulsion are inherently neutral. It is the intent of the architect that dictates their moral weight. As we pause to remember and share the profound implications of this case study, the central lesson is clear. The principles that drive mindless scrolling can be equally effective in cultivating mindful reflection.
The meticulous orchestration of triggers, action, variable reward, and investment is not merely a blueprint for building frivolous digital distractions. It is a universal language of human behavior. When these principles are harnessed with ethical integrity and a genuine desire to elevate the human condition, technology ceases to be a mechanism of extraction and becomes an instrument of profound positive transformation. Chapter 8: Habit Testing and Where to Look for Habit-Forming Opportunities. The transition from theoretical design to practical application marks the most critical juncture in the creation of any behavioral system. Building a product rooted in the psychology of engagement is only the initial skirmish. The true war is won in the meticulous observation and refinement of how real human beings interact with that system in the wild. Once a product is released into the ecosystem, the creator must shift from the role of an architect to that of a behavioral scientist. This ongoing process of empirical observation and iterative refinement is essential because human behavior is notoriously unpredictable. What appears perfectly logical on a whiteboard often crumbles upon contact with actual users. To bridge this gap between intention and reality, creators must implement a rigorous methodology of habit testing. This continuous loop of analysis ensures that the mechanisms of engagement are not functioning merely by chance, but are systematically forged, verified, and strengthened through hard data. Habit testing operates on the fundamental premise that within any user base, a subset of individuals will organically adopt the product and integrate it deeply into their routines. The objective is not to guess what these highly engaged users are doing, but to isolate their behavior, dissect their journey, and re-engineer the platform to shepherd everyone else down that exact same path. This analytical process is broken down into 3 distinct chronological phases, beginning with the crucial need to define the parameters of success. Step 1. Identify requires the creator to answer a deceptively simple question: what exactly constitutes a habitual user for this specific product? It is impossible to analyze a habit without first defining its expected frequency. A social media application might realistically expect multiple interactions per day, while a personal finance dashboard might only require 1 visit per week to constitute a solidified habit. By setting a clear, realistic baseline for habitual engagement, the creator can filter their analytics to separate the passing tourists from the permanent residents. The goal of this identification phase is to isolate the cohort of users who are interacting with the product frequently enough to be considered hooked. It is a process of sifting through the noise of vanity metrics, like total registered accounts or app downloads, to locate the beating heart of the active community. A healthy ecosystem typically reveals that at least 5% of the user base exhibits this deeply ingrained habitual behavior. If this threshold is not met, the underlying behavioral loop is fundamentally fractured and requires immediate structural repair. Step 1. Identify transitions naturally into Step 2. Codify, where the focus shifts from who is engaged to how they became engaged. Once the cohort of habitual users is isolated, the analyst must retrace their digital footsteps. The objective is to unearth the habit path, a specific sequence of actions, investments, and discoveries that these devoted users experienced, which the abandoned users did not. Did the most dedicated users all utilize a specific feature during their first session? Did they all connect with at least 5 friends within their first week? Did they upload a certain amount of content before their engagement skyrocketed? By rigorously examining the data trails of the successful cohort, patterns inevitably emerge. This codification reveals the optimal journey through the product, highlighting the specific interactions that successfully triggered the psychological rewards and secured the necessary investments. The habit path is the blueprint for success, organically authored by the users themselves. Step 3. Modify is the tactical execution of the insights gleaned from the codification phase. Armed with the knowledge of the precise habit path, the creator's mandate is to fundamentally alter the user experience to force new users down this golden corridor. If the data reveals that users who follow 10 people on their first day are vastly more likely to develop a habit, the onboarding process must be ruthlessly redesigned to ensure every new registrant follows 10 people before they can proceed. The interface,
The messaging and the initial triggers must all be recalibrated to facilitate the exact sequence of actions discovered during the codification phase. This is not a one-time adjustment, but a perpetual cycle. As the product evolves and the user base expands, new habit paths will emerge, requiring continuous identification, codification, and modification. The product must act as a living organism, constantly adapting its structure to optimize the environment for habit formation. Discovering habit-forming opportunities requires looking beyond the optimization of existing products and turning an eye toward the horizon. Where do entirely new compulsions come from? The landscape of innovation is littered with missed opportunities because creators mistakenly believe that a successful product must address a clearly articulated, obvious need. However, the most profound behavioral shifts rarely announce themselves loudly. They begin as subtle anomalies, faint signals at the edges of the mainstream. Identifying these nascent opportunities requires a deliberate shift in perspective, training oneself to observe the world not as it is, but as it is attempting to become. Nascent behaviors are the most fertile ground for spotting these emerging opportunities. These are the unusual, often cumbersome activities performed by early adopters, fringe communities, or extreme enthusiasts. When a small group of people goes to extraordinary, inconvenient lengths to solve a problem or satisfy a desire, they are illuminating a raw human need that existing technology has failed to address elegantly. Long before social media empires were built, marginalized groups and niche hobbyists were cobbling together primitive message boards and complex email chains to fulfill their drive for tribal connection. By studying the behaviors that people are already desperately trying to perform despite massive friction, a creator can build a streamlined, habit-forming solution that brings that fringe behavior to the masses. The key is to look for the hack, the awkward workaround that users have invented for themselves, and recognize it as a prototype for a future, frictionless product. Enabling technologies serve as the great catalysts for behavioral shifts. Throughout history, the introduction of a new technological capability has invariably unlocked entirely new dimensions of human interaction. A profound habit-forming opportunity arises the moment a novel technology makes a previously difficult action effortless or introduces an entirely new vector for variable rewards. The integration of high-quality cameras into mobile phones did not just improve photography, it fundamentally altered the habit of visual communication, birthing massive networks entirely predicated on instantaneous image sharing. The proliferation of high-speed wireless internet transformed the solitary act of listening to music into a continuous cloud-based stream of discovery. Innovators must constantly monitor the bleeding edge of technological infrastructure, relentlessly asking how a new capability might eliminate a step, reduce a cognitive load, or introduce a more potent reward into an existing human desire. Interface changes represent another, often overlooked avenue for profound innovation. Sometimes the underlying technology remains entirely static, but a radical shift in how the user interacts with that technology sparks a revolution. A change in interface can dramatically alter the ability phase of the behavioral cycle. The transition from text-based command lines to graphical user interfaces and later from precise mouse clicks to intuitive physical swipes were not merely cosmetic updates. They were massive reductions in cognitive and physical friction. These interface evolutions made computing accessible to entirely new demographics, allowing complex behaviors to become thoughtless habits. Creators must search for environments where the user interface is currently acting as a barrier and envision how a new paradigm of interaction could suddenly make the desired action the path of least resistance. As we reflect on these concepts, the imperative to remember and share is vital. The creation of compelling technology is an ongoing dialogue between the architect and the audience. The initial design is merely a hypothesis. The truth is only revealed through the rigorous, unyielding scrutiny of real-world testing. By identifying the faithful, codifying their journey, and modifying the environment to mirror their success, products evolve from brittle concepts into robust engines of engagement. Furthermore, the future belongs to those who observe the faint signals of the present, the awkward workarounds, the shifting technological tectonic plates, and the clumsy interfaces, and recognize them as the blueprints for tomorrow's compulsions. Do this now demands immediate analytical action. If you have an active product,
Halt your feature development and interrogate your data. Define precisely what a habit looks like for your specific offering. Isolate the users who meet that criteria and forensically reconstruct their pathway through your system. Identify the exact moment they tipped from casual observers into devoted participants. Once you have codified that path, aggressively modify your onboarding experience to guide every new user toward that same revelation. If you are in the ideation phase, look to your own peculiar habits. What awkward, high-friction workarounds do you currently employ in your daily life? Look at the newest capabilities of our devices and ask how they might be harnessed to make those obscure behaviors effortless. The next great habit is already forming. The only question is whether you possess the observational rigor to capture it.